and Sia go.
Good evening, everyone. Good to have a fuller room than we've seen in a long time here since COVID started. Welcome to our biannual Toth-Lonergan Endowed Chair Lecture. It's great to have you all here. A happy Easter to those celebrating. Thank you very much. And it's great to have you to engage in the characteristic work of a university, to listen, to reflect, to question, to dialogue, to converse, maybe to debate. We'll see how the Q&A goes. But these are the characteristic activities that constitute, that make up what the intellectual life is. There's no intellectual life outside of these very things. And they also characterize a healthy community. So it's wonderful to have you all here to engage in that with us today. We are privileged, of course, once again, to have Dr. J Michael Stebbins as our Socratic midwife for the evening. Mike is the visiting Toth-Lonergan professor here at Seton Hall, well known to many of us and well loved by all. He teaches, writes, and lectures on theology, ethics, human cognition and decision-making, as well as the thought of Bernard Lonergan. His first book is The Divine Initiative, Grace, World Order, and Human Freedom, small set of topics, in the early writings of Bernard Lonergan, and it's being reprinted in a second edition as we speak. And during his time with us, Mike has been hard at work on a second book that develops many of the themes he will speak about here tonight on the nature and function of business. This topic, what is business for, or what business is for, pays special tribute to the two men for whom the Toth-Lonergan Chair is named. Knowing Mike, we can be sure that the method of analysis will be indebted to Bernard Lonergan and his cognitional theory, philosophy, and theology. But the topic itself of business was the particular passion of Professor Deacon Dr. Bill Toth, who sought to bring Catholic theology's rich reflection on the dignity of human work to his students and to express it in his writings. As many of you likely know, Lonergan suggested that any good human effort in the world expressed it itself in one of two ways, as healing or as creating. I suspect we will be challenged this evening to see our own work as a calling to those two forms of participation in the world around us, to heal and to create. Tonight is also a bittersweet moment, as it is Mike's last public lecture after 3 years with us as the Toth-Lonergan Chair. Mike, we are so grateful for your attention to us and the many and varied members of our community, for your insight and understanding that have so greatly enriched our lives over these years and over the course of a pandemic, no less, and the commitment you've made to helping us better understand and live and integrate our mission here at Seton Hall, and for your greatest contribution to our community, your wife, Mary Kay.
Yeah.
We will hear, a round of applause for Mary Kay. We will hear from Mike in just a moment, but please join me first in welcoming our founding director, Monsignor Richard Liddy, to offer an opening prayer.
This will be sort of a prayer, but it'll also be a reflection, a bit of a reflection on Mike and certainly on Mary Kay. I thought I'd say something about Easter time, and then say something about desire to know and to seek and to search. Today in the liturgy of the Catholic Church, a very beautiful gospel. It shows Mary Magdalene after Jesus has died, searching for him and not finding him, going to the tomb and not finding him. She meets two angels, and the angels say, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying? What are you looking for?" And she said, "They've taken away my Lord." She turns around, and there's a man there, and she thinks he's the gardener of all things. I don't know, Mike, if you like gardening or not. Anyway, it's quite a beautiful scene. She thinks he's the gardener. And the man says to her, "What are you looking for? Why are you crying? And what are you looking for?" And she said, "They've taken away my Lord. Can you tell me where he is?" And he just says her name. He says, "Mary." And she says, "Rabboni, Master." she puts her arms around him. And he said, "Don't hold on to me. I still have to go to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. And I will return to you in your life." So it's a beautiful scene of searching and seeking and finding, of crying, of longing, and of finding the inspiration, the encouragement, the love to keep going. And I think that characterizes a lot of Mike Stebbins, at least Mike Stebbins, whom I've known, I don't know how many years now, 30 years, the 1990s, who were together at Woodstock Theological Center in Georgetown. And Mike's whole journey has been a journey of seeking and searching. He was a Jesuit seminarian early on. He was a nurse, worked as a nurse for a while. He entered into the academic life, Boston College, Georgetown, Gonzaga, notice all Jesuit institutions. and then got involved in as a vice president for a large healthcare system in the Midwest of era. But always it's been a search and a seek. And I think Father Lonergan's work, I was thinking especially of the notion of a notion. Father talks about we each have a notion of what we're looking for that impels us, that pushes us, that is at the basis of our searching and seeking and our finding, just like Mary Magdalene found someone to put her arms around. She kept searching and seeking. So Mike's been that kind of a person. He's a person with a vocation. What's a vocation but a calling? Somebody calls your name. So we could ask the question, what do we cry about? What name do people give us? What's our name? That might lead us here and there, but we pray, we are true to what's deepest in us, the search, the seeking, the longing, for meaning, for truth, for reality, ultimately for love. So we pray today that Mike be blessed in his whole life, and we thank the Lord especially for his kindness to us in bringing Mike here to Seton Hall and enriching our searching and seeking and longing. There's a beautiful prayer that I like very much, and it's by a French. He'll be canonized the saint of the Catholic Church in May, in the middle of May. His name is Charles de Foucauld, a Frenchman who led a wild life as a young man and had a conversion, 30 years old, eventually became a Trappist monk, and then went to live in Africa. He was touched. He was part of the French Foreign Legion in Northern Africa. He was very moved by the experience of the Muslim people there praying 5 times a day. And he said they had something that he didn't have. And it really turned his life around. He became a very holy man, and he lived in a hermitage in Algeria and died at the time of the Second World War. But he has been responsible for numerous groups that have been born of his vision of being with people and helping people, whoever they are, especially the poor. So let me read his prayer today as we welcome Mike for this talk today. Father, I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. Whatever you may do, I thank you. I am ready for all. Accept all. But only your will be done in me and in all your creatures. I wish no more than this, O Lord. Into your hands I commend my soul. And I offer it to you with all the love of my heart. For I love you, Lord, and so need to give myself, to surrender myself into your hands without reserve, with boundless confidence. You are my Father. So we pray that God's blessing be with Mike Stebbins in a very special way and with all of us here at Seton Hall who have benefited so much from his wisdom and his love. Michael.
So nice to see people in 3 dimensions again. It's great. Thanks for being here. One of the reasons I'm talking about business today is not just that it's a worthy topic, and partly for the reason that Greg mentioned, that my position is named after 2 people who did a lot of work related to business, and I'll say more about that in a minute, but also because I've had a chance to get involved with people in our own school of business here, the Stillman School, who are co-sponsoring today's lecture. So thank you very much for that. Dean Joyce Strouser is here, Mark Schild, Tony Levisic, Yeoman Yoon, and I may have missed other, well, yeah, the snappiest dresser in the room. Second snappiest dresser. And Greg, thanks for spilling my secret about, why I get anything done, or thanks, Mary Kay. So this is the last Toth-Lonergan lecture I'm going to give, and because I've been thinking about business ethics and business generally a lot, and I don't like to think of it as business ethics, I'll say more about that, but I want to focus on something that Bill Toth and Bernard Lonergan both thought was important. I knew both of them. I knew Bill better than Father Lonergan. Back in the days when Bill was teaching here and was starting the Micah project, and even before that, when he was starting the Office of Work-Life Ministry in, I think, the Diocese of Patterson, I did a lot of training for him with deacons in a program I'd put together to help people who were wondering, how do I make my faith fit with my work? What can I make those make sense together? Can I find the meaning of my faith in the work I do in my business? So we became friends, and of course, we were all devastated when we lost him far too young. And Bernard Lonergan, although he's best known for his work in philosophy and theology and methodology, he spent a lot of time at the beginning of his career and at the end of his career trying to work out a new macroeconomic theory, a theory that would explain booms and slumps, because he thought that there was a natural undulation in the economy, that if we understood it correctly, we cooperate with the natural motion and end up without a boom and a slump, but just a basic phase and a surplus phase and in the surplus phase, we could feed the innovation we needed to keep things going. And he was also very concerned with the economy being a democratically functioning system that would present people with choices and the information they needed to make those choices, and let them choose. So he was very much against central planning. He took, among the principles of Catholic social teaching, one that he especially was interested in was subsidiarity. How do you let the people who are on the spot, who've seen what's going on, who know how it works, who have some ideas about how it could be fixed, how do you bring them in and make sure that they're consulted? Jamie, I don't know if you were in the room, but I mentioned everybody that I could spot here from the Stillman School. Thank you for that. So all those thoughts are going through my head, that these are people who both thought that understanding what the economy is for and what business is for is really important. Now, my career was unforeseen. I ended up going down all sorts of paths I didn't expect to. Even the nursing thing, I did that because I was going to be a theologian, and maybe I was anticipating the day of the adjunct professor, and I thought I would need another gig to be able to do simultaneously, but I only worked briefly in nursing. But I was asked by people at the Woodstock Theological Center, which is where I got to know Monsignor Liddy, to run a program in social ethics for business. So I did that for about 6 years, and that's where I began working with Bill Toth, because through Dick, who also was at Woodstock. At Gonzaga, which was my next stop, also my alma mater, I taught a lot of courses in the business school: business ethics, leadership, critical thinking and decision making. And while I was there, I gave lots of talks to businesses and nonprofits and people in the region, mostly about ethics and decision making. Sat on the board of the Regional Better Business Bureau. Then, through another kind of happy accident, I ended up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in this fairly good-sized health system, a Catholic health system called Avera Health, as the executive VP of mission. And it was a big company when I left. I mean, as things like this go, about $2.5 billion of net patient revenue every year and about 18,000 employees. And then suddenly here I was in the executive suite, worrying about the fact that our margins were decreasing. Even in a nonprofit, you better make a margin. They don't call it profit. But when I got there, it was 4%. 1 year it was 5%, and they just knew how to do that. And it was 3 point something, and then it was 2.9, and then it was, So I got to experience what it's like to worry about, are we going to make it? Can we build the new building we need? Can we replace the old patient rooms? And then here, of course, at Seton Hall, I've lectured on several occasions to classes taught by people in the room. And I was invited to help think about ethical values that the Stillman School could mull over and then decide to accept and use them as kind of a basis from which to teach all their courses and have a common reference point and a common language for talking about ethics. Most recently, I was given the opportunity to teach an MBA course called, it's a course I invented. It's not in the catalog, it's special topics. Effective Thinking and Decision Making for Managers. There's a whole lot of Lonergan in that. So for the past 25 years, I've thought about business a lot. And the issue of what business is for, I think, is really important. There are different views about that. There are academic theories that have been put together to try to back up one or another view. And while those are important, and I will touch on them, the most important thing, I think, is what any of us kind of spontaneously thinks about business. We feel good about business. What is our way of understanding what it's for? Is it our friend or our enemy or both, or we're not sure? And so I want to talk a little bit about that and talk a little bit differently from some of the ways you may be used to hearing about it. Not completely unrelated, but a little bit different. I think unless we have a fairly accurate understanding of what businesses are and what they do, we don't know what we can expect of them. What should we expect of them, right? What can we ask them to do as they operate? So let me just describe what you might call a mindset about business. So what kind of a thing is it? What's its nature, so to speak? And I think if you look at it concretely in terms of what it does, how it functions, you can get a sense of what a business is. So we all know that business is a part of the economy. It functions, any business functions within the economy. And you might ask, well, why do we have an economy? And to a lot of the people here, it's fairly obvious. We can't produce everything we need in order to live the way we want to. So a long time ago, because people are intelligent and have always been, we've been devising or learning from others ways to cooperate so that our needs can be met effectively. over and over and over again. Not just this planting season and harvest season, but next year's planting season, harvest season, and so forth. So since time immemorial, people have decided to work together, to cooperate. It's a vast network of cooperative relationships that people participate in, usually willingly in some fashion, in order to get their needs met. We participate as employees, as consumers, as producers, and so forth. So Lonergan frames economic activity when he's talking about it generally, as he does all human undertakings, in terms of what can be called particular goods and patterns of cooperation. So a particular good is just anything that satisfies or contributes to satisfying a want or a need. We'll just stay with legitimate wants and needs so we don't get into the argument about that sort of thing. So right now I'm kind of thirsty, my mouth's a little dry. Here's a particular good. Actually, my drinking it, that's the particular good. But if you think about, I have this in my hand. Where did it come from? Italian sparkling mineral water. Kirkland. Glad to have a representative in the room. We bought it at Costco. Somebody had to get this out of the water. Somebody had to bottle it. Somebody had to make the bottles. Somebody had to transport the bottles to the ship or whatever brought them to our shores. They had to be loaded and unloaded. They had to be put in trucks. They had to be taken to distribution centers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody had to price them. Somebody had to order them. Somebody had to do all the financing of the various parts of that. Somebody had to make the machinery that made the trucks. Somebody had to build the roads. So all of our needs, practically speaking, involve thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So when we think about business and the economy, you can't think of business as something that's just separate, or even the economy is just separate. It's just, and any one business is not my business, because as soon as I engage in one transaction of any kind with any other entity, I'm starting to get pulled into these intersecting patterns that are very dynamic, that shift and change to adjust to new situations and so forth. So Lonergan talks about these networks of cooperation as the structural component, so to speak, of human cooperation. The institutions, the people, their skills, their roles and tasks, their willingness to fulfill the roles they play and to carry out those tasks intelligently and responsibly. It's all part of what makes the thing go. Now, both Bill Toth and Bernard Lonergan were clear about the purpose of the economy. It was not just to produce any standard of living, but to work toward the emergence and sustainability of a standard of living that's just and humane for an entire society. Bill Toth, using the language of Catholic social teaching, would normally frame this in terms of pursuing the common good. Lonergan tended to use the term the human good, and he had a particular reason for doing that. But in either case, what it means is that the economic system should provide, in the larger scheme of things, a standard of living that not only meets people's basic needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, medical care, that not only makes it possible for them to enjoy a certain degree of comfort and leisure, but that also does all these things in a way that facilitates, or at least doesn't interfere with, people's pursuit of higher values, such as growth in knowledge, which we're trying to do at Seton Hall. The flourishing of a culture that promotes truly human art, education, science, that promotes the family, that promotes and not get in the way of personal and spiritual development, and to do so in a manner that can be carried forward into the future. So that's a big ask, right? It's a big ask of an economy. But that's the kind of thing we're trying to move toward continually. Lonergan especially is never thinking about he never thinks about the common good or the human good as a goal that we can clearly see. But he's always talking about in terms of incremental improvement. What's the next increment where we can push forward and make a little bit of progress and avoid decline. So in this perspective, every business is essentially a cooperative enterprise. Of course, there's competition for market share with similar, with people selling in the same space. There's competition these days for employees, who are a scarce resource, at least at the moment. So it's a cooperative enterprise, and its fundamental purpose, any business's fundamental purpose, is to make its own specific contribution to the emergence and sustainability of a just and humane standard of living that works for everybody. So businesses are going to be adding their own part to that within this network of cooperation that's going on. And of course, there's no blueprint that tells us exactly what such a standard of living should look like, no predetermined route by which to get there. But a key requirement is that business leaders devote themselves to the real purpose of business with the same levels of intelligence and energy and responsibility that they're usually thought of as devoting to profits, making sure that they get bring in a good profit margin. Now, this mindset that I've been describing, and we can talk about it more in the questions at the end, it's distinct from other business mindsets, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. They always get reviewed in the textbooks on ethics and in management and so forth. I remember coming across this quotation when I was at Woodstock. It was in The Economist, and I've lost what edition of The Economist it was in and what page and so forth. But it was this, 2 sentences. It is not natural for businesses to do good. The only thing businesses do naturally is to maximize profits and minimize costs. So that's a different model, different understanding of what business is for. In other words, if businesses do good, and of course that's undefined here, but if they're do-gooders, they're acting against their nature. Well, in Catholic theology, we call that sin. Acting against your nature, doing something unnatural. And so that way of talking is often associated with something called commonly the shareholder view of the purpose of business, which basically says that this is the owner's business, the shareholders, whoever the owners are, and management has a fiduciary responsibility to run the business in a way that maximizes profits and minimizes costs, while of course obeying all the applicable laws and regulations, and also operating in line with whatever the customary moral standards are. And there have been a lot of critiques of this, and I'll just mention a few of them because I don't want to get lost in this discussion. But it does treat a business as a relatively isolated thing. Kind of, it has all these relationships, yes, but in terms of thinking about what its purpose is, the purpose is internal, so to speak. Maximizing profit, well, what's maximum? What's your maximum? How do you figure that out? Short term, long term, it's vague about that. More importantly, I think profit is never an end. It's always a means. You have profit, just like at Avera, we had a margin, and then the question is, what do we do with this? There are a lot of choices to be made once you have a profit on your sheet, your spreadsheets. It also confuses the owner's motive with the purpose of the business. So the owners might have built the business or bought the business and are running the business so they can maximize their, the money they gain from it. They want to maximize their gain, their return on their investment or whatever. But that's not the same as the purpose of the business. I know that the owners of Major League Baseball make tons of money, but that's not the purpose of the business. The purpose of the business is for us to enjoy baseball, really high-level baseball. And if we stop enjoying it, they're going to stop making their margin. So to say that that's the purpose of the business, I don't think that's right. It may be the motive of the owner and of the executives that get paid high salaries. In addition, it tends to recognize self-interest as the only real human motive. In the end, everything can be boiled down to, I want it for me because I'm selfish. And I don't think that's an adequate understanding of the human person. Even for the owners, it assumes that the owners, that's their only goal. And owners are more complicated than that. as I think we probably can all imagine. Now, some people defend this view still as the correct one, but I found that even for people who are in business who haven't really thought too hard about it, when they're asked about the purpose of business, when I talked with them, their default position was to say something about, well, it's about making money. It's about profit. That's kind of the language that was there for them to grab, and so they used it. But when I watched how they operated, they didn't operate like that. Clearly something else was going on. Now, that's not the only view out there. There's been around for a long time, the notion of corporate social responsibility in various forms that recognizes that business is a social institution and has other responsibilities for quite a few years now, several decades, in fact. We've had the stakeholder view, which says that businesses ought to be run in terms of satisfying and balancing, at least balancing the interests of the various stakeholders in a firm. So that could be your employees, of course, your customers, your vendors, your creditors, et cetera, et cetera. And that's still a fairly widely talked about view and is a lot closer, I think, to an accurate understanding what business does than the shareholder view is. I still find a few problems with it, however. Sometimes it's just lip service. You know, you name the stakeholders, you say, here's what we're doing for each, and as soon as you've checked the boxes, you kind of, you're done, you've done your part, and underneath what you're really doing it only because this is what you have to do to get profits. It's not because you see that as the purpose of your business, it's a necessary evil in a sense. And not all people use it that way at all, but it can be open to that. I've seen fairly cynical use of that approach. And to the extent that stakeholders are self-interested, then balancing their interests turns out to be just kind of a negotiation where nobody's really thinking about the good of the whole. Everybody's just trying to get what they can, enough of what they want so that they stay participants in the overall enterprise, right? No one's really thinking about what's best for us or for what we contribute to the standard of living. We're each thinking about just our own interest. It can devolve into that. It doesn't always. Sometimes it's much better than that. And also the talk is always about what does the business owe the stakeholders, but I don't typically hear a lot about, well, what do the stakeholders owe the business? It should be a two-way street. It is a two-way street. So those other ways are out there of talking about business, just by way of contrast. Now, I'm trying to be conscious of my time because I want to leave plenty of room for us to discuss any of this that you're interested in asking questions about or making comments on. So let me talk about ethics, business ethics. What struck me early on when I started having to think about business ethics when I was at Woodstock, I was reading business ethics texts and talking to a couple of people who taught business ethics at Georgetown. And what I noticed was basically it was, especially when I looked at the case studies, they were mostly case studies of just bad behavior. And basically saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, oh, not that either, and this is really bad, you know. And I would have people coming up to me after I gave a workshop or something on business ethics, and they would say things like, that was really interesting, but I wish the people who really needed it were here, you know. So kind of the focus on bad behavior, and can we make those people stop? Well, first of all, of course, maybe I was, working with a selected or selective group of business people, but I kept finding business people who just wanted to do things well. And they did for the most part. I mean, most of the time things work. We get what we need, and there's a lot of good behavior going on there, a lot of intelligence, a lot of complexity being dealt with. So I started using a distinction that Lonergan makes, excuse me, between on the one hand, the ethics of compliance, and on the other, the ethics of achievement. So the ethics of compliance we're all familiar with, don't do that, or make sure you do that because there's going to be a penalty if you don't. And the reason you do what the ethics requires is because you fear the penalty. You don't want to face that. So you do it out of compliance. And, it's kind of a negative, it doesn't lift you up. It's just something you have to do. And it can even take the form of social pressure where, well, we'd better be doing more of this kind of thing over here because otherwise this pressure group is going to, our investors are going to, kick us out of their fund, the director of this particular fund is going to kick us out because we don't fit the criteria anymore. We're not good enough, right? So fear drives that kind of ethics, whether it's good or not, and often it's needed in many cases, but that's not all that business ethics ought to be. If you think about ethics, about business the way I've just been describing, then I want to say that we ought to be thinking also about an ethics of achievement, which is oriented toward maximizing the good that you can accomplish with the business you're running, and recognizing the many different kinds of value that a business adds, not just financial value, obviously that's critical, and not just its product, obviously that's critical, but businesses add all kinds of value or can be in the position also of detracting, hindering the emergence of other kinds of value. So just a very quick, brief example, when I was teaching business ethics at Gonzaga in 2000, 2001, I sent a bunch of students up to a little town called Addy, where Kaiser was in the process of shutting down an aluminum smelter that had been operating for a number of years. It had always been kind of a borderline proposition because aluminum could be produced more cheaply in other places. It was hard for them to do it economically, but they were very good at this particular place of making sure that their employees were consulted on an ongoing basis about how can we do this smarter? How can we make this process better? And so the employees were really bought in. They felt like they were participants, that their intelligence was wanted, their thoughts were appreciated, their input. So it had to be shut down anyway in the end, despite all their efforts. They had really done a good job of that. So I sent the students up to talk to people in the town, not only at the smelter, but in the town, to find out what's going to be different in Addy when the smelter goes away. And just the fact of those employees' wages, which were good wages, no longer being available to be spent in the town was going to affect lots of people. And that meant kids weren't going to get piano lessons because the piano teacher couldn't afford to give so few lessons, or it was going to affect the school's budget because now their student population was so low. It was going to affect the whole climate of the town. And so that's not a thing people think about when they think about what's the good my business is doing. You can talk about the stakeholders being the local community, but the ethics of achievement would challenge people to think through, what good am I adding? What good are we adding by the work we do? And to be aware of that, not only to look after it, but also, I think it helps you understand the nobility of the work you're doing. You're actually making life better for all kinds of people just by doing what a business does and doing it well, doing it properly, right? I didn't hear a bad word about this company from any of the employees. So the other thing about the ethics of achievement is, especially when you're thinking in terms of patterns of cooperation, you recognize that ethical obligations arise from all these relationships. They're not extrinsic to the business. You don't layer on ethics. We make a profit and then we'll try to be ethical by obeying these laws, or we make a profit but we'll also make sure our shareholders or stakeholders are happy. The very carrying out of business activity is about people living up to what is required of them in these relationships. I spent some time working with a family-owned set of car dealerships in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho when I was at Gonzaga. And they had me trying to get the service and the sales and the parts people to understand that they had to know what each other needed in order to make the whole thing go. So a lot of times business ethics has to do with making sure people understand how this place works. And why do we need you to do this well? And look who's depending on you, and look who you're depending on, and trying to respect all those relationships. Okay? That's really different from focusing on, Enron, which of course was terrible. But don't confuse illegality and dealing with illegality with the soul of business ethics. It just isn't. It just isn't. The ethics of achievement, it means you're never finished. It's just incremental progress, growing awareness. Can we, like the people at the smelter, while they were trying to keep it going, what else can we do? We're smart. What else can we come up with? Okay. And you also have to be bringing your people along in a situation like that. This is part of what I did at Avera Health. I had oversight of the mission and core values for the system. And so I had to go everywhere and train people and point out, that thing you just did, that's one of our values. That's our value of compassion and our value of hospitality being enacted right there. And I would have people say, oh, I never thought of that. So partly it's just pointing out the good you're already doing. See, I think we don't do that enough with businesses. There's doing business, and okay, and then doing good is something extra. If you're helping people live well by the way you're doing business, that's already good. It may not be enough. There may be more to do. I'm not saying it can't be criticized in various ways. I don't mean anybody's doing it perfectly. I'm just saying in the actual world in which we live, good and bad are mixed together. And in a lot of cases, there's way more good than there is bad. And business, I think, gets, for all the things we can rightly criticize various businesses for, or various business practices, we owe so much to the fact that there are people doing a good job of making it go. All right. So I'm just going to mention the fact that in my book, I'll say more about this next topic. What kind of personal characteristics do business people need to cultivate to make businesses work well? Well, it's not like no one's ever done it, right? We already have people like this, but we don't tend to focus on this. Lonergan's way of thinking about it, and he's following Aquinas and Aristotle in this, is that our worst enemy is our own bad habits of thinking and choosing that make it hard for us to figure out what the good thing is to do, or make it hard for us to be willing to do it. And so you have to help people cultivate virtues, which are only good habits that make it easier to figure out what the right thing is and to do, and more willing spontaneously, so you don't have to have a fight with yourself, more willing to do the good thing. Lonergan calls it antecedent willingness. You don't have to be persuaded. There's what ought to be done. Oh, that looks hard, but I'm the kind of person who just does what needs to be done because I can't imagine operating any other way. So, and there's a lot else that would have to be talked about here. If you're going to try to be a good person in all parts of your life, you need good friends, because good friends support each other in hard times and encourage each other when you need it. They can, call each other to task when they see something that doesn't look like, oh, that's not the best you I'm seeing. What's going on, right? So that kind of friendly criticism for the good of the other person, because the kind of friend I'm talking about is like Aristotle's third kind of friendship, for anybody that's taught the first core course, where each friend has the good of the other person in mind. They like you, they love you because of who you are. They see the good in that. When something happens to you that's good, that makes them happy. So I always, especially when I teach seniors, I've taught seniors in a capstone course for a leadership program at the Business School at Gonzaga. I would always emphasize, when you're here at the university, you're making some of the best friends you'll ever have. Some of these people will be keepers, and when you're my age, you'll still want to talk with them and be with them, and they'll know you better than anybody because they knew you back when you still had a lot of potential and still had hair and everything else. But you've walked a long way together, and it's so much easier now to stay in touch because we have this. I'm not all for this in many respects. It develops bad habits. I can see it developing some in me sometimes, but it does let us keep in touch. Screens keep us in touch, as COVID taught us, in a way that wasn't possible before. And the last thing, too, Lonergan is really big on the need for freedom. He always says that liberty is the root of progress. And a lot of what he means by that is that if you have to be free to experience, free to think, free to have ideas, free to express them, free to espouse values. And even if you're thinking in economic terms, you have to be free to have the ideas that eventually become improvement and innovation and that sort of thing. And that he was very affected by living in Rome during the 1930s and watching the totalitarian systems growing and becoming huge threats. And he knew the answer wasn't to have a top-down solution. Direction from the top, but most of the ideas come from below, he thought. So anyway, I can't develop that more because we don't have time, but that's a big part of this, because in the end, businesses are run by people, and if the people aren't oriented towards real value and towards true understanding and making good decisions, we're in a world of hurt. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about, I've entitled this section God's World. So I am a theologian. I think in these terms a lot. And people tend to think of business often, as a kind of reality unto itself, almost as if it were in a bubble when they talk about it. Or I think it's easy, for someone, about my only relation to business, where I'm thinking about things as businesses, is the fact that I own some investments. And I'm looking for what return I'm going to get. So even I can get into kind of a bubble in that way. And there's this notion of business having its own rules that are distinct from the rules outside. People will talk that way, some people. And so one of the reasons there was this program at Woodstock that I was asked to run, it was supposed to be about social ethics for business, but it ended up being just as much about faith and work, like Bill Toth was involved in, as anything else. And that's because there were really good people. Wally Kennedy, who comes to all our praxis meetings, was one of these people who either were finding a real conflict between their own values and the things that were happening at work, or wanted a deeper understanding of how their faith could be made effective in their work, that they would be linked somehow and not just juxtaposed. So I just wanted to end with talking a little bit about how people with religious faith or with a real sense of spirituality, how can they think about the relation between their faith and their business? And the best way I know how to speak about it for myself is from a Catholic or Christian standpoint. So bear with me here as I indicate what I shared with people in these programs, what we talked about. I mean, one way of thinking about it, what do faith and work have to do with each other, is nothing. There's a wall. They're hermetically sealed from each other. They don't, you just compartmentalize. What you need to do at work, you do at work. Then you leave it and you go home or wherever else and you operate however you operate there. And you don't have to worry because the two spheres of your life are really separate. Well, enough movies have been made and enough real cases have happened that we can see the negative effect that can have on a person's character, their understanding of life. More often, I think people think there's some kind of overlap and often they talk about bringing their faith to their work or into their work. And that can take a lot of different forms by, living the golden rule. By praying at work, maybe just privately, say, or sometimes even in certain places, I've run into people, they've conducted little Bible studies at lunch with like-minded colleagues, or by volunteering as part of their work. I once had a Catholic business person ask me, what would a Catholic business look like? I wasn't sure how to answer him about that. He wanted to know, could it have retreats, devotions, everybody having prayer together? I mean, it could. But that's one way. You bring religiously oriented behavior into the workplace. Okay? There's another, and I'm not against that if you can pull it off. In a lot of workplaces, that would be hard to manage. But I want to talk about a third way, another way that people could think about doing business in a more fully human way as a result of having received God's grace. And so this requires a brief foray into the theology of grace. If you missed my other 2 lectures on grace, you'll just have to take my word for it here. So we often think about grace. What does grace do for us? I'm speaking again as a Catholic theologian, so this isn't, some of the things I'll say may not sound quite like what Protestant theology would say. We think about grace in terms of the forgiveness of sins. Okay? Grace, if I receive grace, my sins are forgiven. We talk about grace in terms of, well, it means that eternal life can be our destiny, and we're friends of God. But there's another aspect of grace that Catholic theology talks about, of where grace heals nature, the phrase we use. Now, I've had people say to me in various situations, I think particularly of a course I had to teach when I was first at Gonzaga, and I was the low person on the department totem pole, and I had to teach Christian sexual morality. Well, turns out students might have thought that would be interesting, but mostly they found themselves disagreeing with a lot of what they heard. Anyway, they would talk about whatever had happened on the weekend, and not necessarily anything having to do with sex, but people drank and partied and so forth, and they would laugh at kind of things they'd done that probably weren't good for them, and they would say, I'm only human. And that's kind of buying into the idea that to be human is to be full of sin, or to just run afoul of all kinds of mistakes and bad behavior and so forth. That's just the way we are. And, modern political theory, Hobbes, Locke, and so forth, is built on a certain amount of that understanding that, let's just admit it, we're self-interested. All we want is to preserve ourselves or preserve our happiness. So let's just assume that we'll build something on that, what my dissertation mentor, Fred Lawrence, calls that low, sturdy base of human self-interest. We'll build a political and economic structure on top of that, so that you're only being human. But Catholic theology talks about, the fall makes you less than human. And if you receive grace, it both restores your humanity, makes you capable of acting and being like a good human should be, and it also elevates you supernaturally to union with God. So this part down here, what it's saying is that to be really human is to be virtuous. To not be virtuous, you're falling short of what it really means to be human. So don't tell me I'm only human. But yes, we're fallible, we're weak. But we're meant to be just as human. What Lonergan spells out when he uses the term authenticity, we're meant to pay attention. We're meant to be inquisitive and try to understand. We're meant to be willing to pursue the truth and not just accept any understanding as correct. We're meant to figure out, well, is there something I need to do about this, and make value judgments and and move on to good decisions and make plans that make sense and are likely to work, because that's the equipment we've been given. Our minds and hearts are built to produce good and to contribute to progress. We often don't live up to that, and that's true. And it's less than human. So partly this is about having not just a different understanding of business, a different way of formulating what it's for, a mindset, but a different mindset about ourselves and what it means for us to live up to who we're supposed to be. Not that when we fail, then we fall apart. No, that's not it. But just to be clear about what human fulfillment and being fully human is like. So one overriding way people can bring their faith to work or live a calling or live a vocation in the business world, I think, is to live as a person of grace in that context. It doesn't mean miracles. It doesn't mean having insights no one else can have, but it means being freer. It means bringing hope as opposed to cynicism and hopelessness, bringing charity and true concern for people as opposed to self-centeredness or greed or pride, respect for people's freedom and personhood as opposed to wanting to control and manipulate people. Just make them get it done, whatever it takes. And all those other things I said about paying attention, trying to figure things out and understand and so forth. All of which, when you think about it, add up to what it means to be not only a good human being, but a competent human being. Being good includes being competent, because otherwise you have only intentions, not the ability to do something effective about them. God wants us to be competent so that we can accomplish the good. So, business can be, and often is, a noble institution. Working in a business can be, and for many people is, a calling or a vocation. If you think about the really big picture in which business fits, it's this. There's only one real world. So when people say, be real, okay, so let's be real. There's one real world, and it's God's world, period. Business is part of that world, and like everything else, every other human enterprise, it needs to be aligned with God's intentions. So is the bottom line still a concern, an essential consideration? Yes, of course it is. And I'm not at all interested in bashing capitalism or ignoring the practicalities involved in running a business. But I do want to insist that we get the basic storyline right. And that's really all I'm trying to get across today. Business isn't for the sake of profit. Profit is for the sake of business. And business is for the sake of the common good. So I'm going to stop there and open up for questions or thoughts. Thanks. Yeoman.
Okay, good. Recently, one editor of a journal asked me to write an article. The suggested title was, "What is the #1 principle of American capitalism?" And I agree and suggested I'm going to add the answer in the title. Caveat emptor. Buyer beware.
Yeah.
According to resident ethicist, Columbia University Business School, her name is Barbara, I forgot her last name, Barbara X, I quote, "In America, business ethics is an oxymoron."
Okay.
Now, give us your unvarnished views on these two views. What is the #1 principle of capitalism, caveat emptor, and
Business is an oxymoron. Okay. So I've been asked to give my unvarnished views on these two different principles. One is caveat emptor, is that the primary principle of American business, and the other is business ethics is an oxymoron. Well, let me say something about the second of those first. If business ethics were an oxymoron, nothing would work. We wouldn't, I just think that enough people are doing their job. Enough intelligence is built into the patterns of cooperation and enough people are cooperating that most of the time we get most of what we want, at least in this country, now, I don't want to, and you're next. And so, I don't want to minimize the fact that there are people who are unethical, or that bad things happen because people aren't paying attention, they're careless. But I do think that on balance, business is not unethical. There are certain practices that may be more ethically questionable than others, or actually ethically wrong. I don't have evidence that they're so widespread that I would want to say business ethics is an oxymoron, because I think that the fact that it mostly operates shows that that's not the case. Caveat emptor, buyer beware, let the buyer beware. I don't know if that's the first principle or not, but yeah, I do think people are, you have to be somewhat wary in certain purchasing situations. We're so used these days to Amazon or Costco where you just bring it back. I don't like this. And then I didn't have to beware. So I think, again, that's but it is the case that in many things, I'm thinking about all those disclosures that come on pieces of paper, and they're very small, or you hear them at the end of TV ads, and now they can take out the space between the words and between the vowels and the consonants so that you can't really understand what they're telling you to be wary of. So I think people can sometimes check the box in terms of what it means to give people those kinds of warnings about what they should look out for. But good luck with that article.
I have a response.
Yes, please. This is a response.
It's a word that people don't emphasize. It's all about trust.
Yes.
There it is. It's trust.
Okay.
Because organized exchanges don't exist without trust. I can tell you in financial markets, you pay a big price for trust, because as soon as trust is broken, the deal is off.
Yeah. Okay. So that's
the foundation of capitalism. It's based on trust.
okay. So that's something I didn't talk about in connection with cooperation, but obviously cooperation is all about trust, because it's about relationships where I'm going to need something from you, and if you don't need something from me, someone,
Correct.
yeah, the whole thing's got to be kept moving. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to, because you talk about spirituality and the Catholic belief about grace.
Yes.
I've been blessed to have both worlds. My mother, Catholic, my father, Methodist.
Okay.
They believe the same thing, that grace is unmerited favor. They do believe the same thing. And moreover, you touched on something, and spirituality. I too, I'm not in business like money, but business is like dealing with people. And when you start anew and you're not spiritually connected, you think about yourself. It's
Okay.
me, mine, and myself. When you get spiritually connected, then you do it as unto God. What would God want me to do?
Yeah.
So,
okay.
and that's what you are focusing on. That's
Yes.
very good business.
Okay.
But I'm sorry, I cannot stay to the end. My sister is going for therapy. I have to be with her.
Everybody's on a schedule,
Okay,
including
God
us,
bless.
most of the time. So thank you.
Thank you.
So the comment there was just that grace is about being spiritually connected. And when you're spiritually connected, then you're operating with a different motive, with the motive of serving people and not just looking out for yourself.
If you want my question.
Okay.
I'll summarize the first one. Sort of talking about the insight that business is also a function of culture.
Yeah.
And so is that a useful, valuable insight? And how does it help us frame this discussion of business? Rather than
So do I need to repeat that? Okay, all right. So yeah, I think a larger treatment of this, you keep pushing out into, the patterns of cooperation also involve culture, and where are people picking up the meanings and values that they assign to different aspects of their living together, and you're formed by your culture, either because you're buying into parts of it or you're resisting parts of it, and so forth. So absolutely, in terms of what people expect, what does a good standard of living look like? Well, there are many other countries where people would be satisfied with a lot less than what we would call, a satisfactory standard of living. So yeah, it certainly would have to figure in. Yeah. If you'd given me 15 more minutes.
We speak of the firm and its goals and financial values, but what I see and experience with entrepreneurs, the foundation of business, is a passion for the product and the service,
Right.
and that the returns need to remain derivative.
Yeah. So you have an idea. You say, "Wow, this is a great product or service or whatever it is," and that's what gets things going. It's that desire to do good, really. I mean, making money might be behind it, but you want to prove your product. You want to show that it works in a way that you think it will, and that it's going to be helpful to people. So, yeah, I think that's really the case. I've heard that before from a number of people that I mean, I think that's probably true of anybody. You think the Wright brothers weren't making a lot of money trying to build their airplane and so forth. But yeah. So that's a good point. Thank you, Paula. Yes. Yeah. So a lot of this is about meeting needs, right? You say, yeah. So and that's the marketing approach to business. What do people need and want, and how can I supply that? So responding to need is a big deal. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
I'll just give you an example I found out yesterday when I was seeing my dermatologist. He mentioned, of course, that a lot of people are very shy of needles. And a friend of his just recently came up with, for 45 minutes, you can put a patch on some part of your body where they're going to stick a needle, and it actually serves as like an anesthesia.
Yeah.
And so as a result now, she didn't expect this to happen. After she tried it with a few patients, the patients said, hey, that's really, well, it's now starting to expand. And that's a worldwide market that she would be, in this case,
Okay.
fulfilling.
So
But you can see where the motivation came from. It actually came in this case from, because people were being hurt by needles, so what can we do to overcome that problem? And so she comes up with this idea, and bingo, it works.
Okay.
So call it in this case, the income turns out to be more the outcome than it was the objective.
Right. Yeah. I'd like to help people so they can get injected. So the idea of
And then I get a reward for doing so. That's okay.
right. Okay. So the example of what would you call it? Local anesthetic in a pad, right? You just make it easier to get shots. We have a daughter that I know would really appreciate that.
There it is.
It beats fainting every time.
Yeah, it does. And that was the complaint that he
Yeah.
said, patients are fainting every time they see a needle. And you can see, well, to get something for the vaccinations, you have to get 4 of these.
Yeah.
That's 4 faintings.
Right. Yeah. It's a long time at the doctor's office.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Oh, I was going to say,
go ahead.
no. It seems to me that a lot of what you're talking about is like smaller businesses, family businesses, healthcare businesses, and so on. But what about these huge conglomerates like Amazon and Walmart and so on, who seem to be in business to drive out other businesses?
Yeah, I mean,
And
so
I think that's where a lot of the, at least for my part, where the negative perceptions, Amazon in particular treating its employees so badly, and
yeah, they finally got a union
Plus some
in one
more.
place. Yeah. So that whole thing about consolidation, and you have fewer firms, bigger firms, kind of controlling the market. I'm not an economist, but I assume that in general you don't want that happening too much.
You are two-handed, so you are.
So yeah, so the approach I'm taking is always just asking people wherever they're located, and if you're in a big corporation, even big corporations have pieces often, departments and so forth, teams, and trying to operate the part you operate or participate in the part you're in a way that reflects this different understanding. Now, if the larger corporation doesn't get that, if it's really not a great place to work for other reasons, or cutthroat, or out to inhale all other businesses, everybody. The entrepreneur's point is, I have a great product, and I'm going to grow it, and I'm going to sell it to Google, that kind of thing. But so it's always just asking people, really, what's the best you can do in this situation? Think about what's the more here. And this comes partly from my Jesuit training, the magis, St. Ignatius Loyola talking about the more. Always try to choose the greater good, whatever that is, in any situation. Yeah, but big businesses are hard that way. And then Yeoman, you.
Oh, yes, thank you. I have a more serious question for you, which is close to my heart.
Okay.
The reality, okay, never mind. I quote winner of Pulitzer Prize and the former reporter of New York Times, Chris Hedge,
Okay.
from his book, Empire of Illusion. Our financial system was taken hostage and looted by bankers, brokers, and speculators who told us that the old means of making capital by producing and manufacturing were outdated. They assured us money could be made out of money. They insisted that our financial markets could be self-regulating. Like all financial markets throughout history that have thrown off oversight and regulation, ours has collapsed. Speculators in the 17th century were hanged. Today, they receive billions in taxpayer dollars and huge bonuses. The book is right after the financial crisis, of course. Yeah? Now, my question is, the power elite of this country are really, truly willing to move the economy from that dismal situation to your description, business can be noble business. And as emphasizing common good rather than private good. Are you dreaming?
Well, my fallback position always is, this is God's world. So for starters, I'm not in control, and I trust the one who is. That being said, there are bad actors, or there are people who, with too narrow a vision, they're pursuing something that's not good for the economy as a whole over time. I don't know a lot about the financialization of the economy that I know talk about. Thank you. And I wouldn't know where to draw the lines between what makes sense and what doesn't. But you do want financial transactions overall to be contributing in some way to an economy that's uplifting everybody somehow. So getting the proceeds from that somehow ending up being invested in ways that promote that kind of development. Nancy, and then Nancy. Okay. I think Ed.
Thank you, Mike. It was very interesting. This came up in my class and also came up in the class I observed in both core twos about the enormous economic, inequality that has happened in the last several decades. And I think it relates to the question that was just asked. It's not, we're not just talking about, that there are different degrees of income, but we're talking about, like, in the one class, it was actually Todd Stockdale's class, he quoted, and I think my student also quoted from Robert Reich, I might have been the same article, but I'm not sure, about how, the top maybe 10 people make so much money that it would take like 400 years for them to spend $1 million a day. We're talking like enormous amount.
Yeah.
And like the students in my class, we talked about this, and also in his class, there's such a sense of, I guess you could just say, greed and imbalance in that it's not only unethical, it's like, I would call it evil. So how do you think Lonergan would address that?
Well, I think you probably have a problem with it if wealth gets too concentrated. I don't have much doubt about that. Then the issue becomes, okay, so what can we do about it? Where are the proper levers? If there are any. How do you shift things in such a way that because you don't want to penalize people for the wrong things. So we'd have to be very careful to discern and be able to distinguish what about the behavior is unhelpful. What's the proper way to try to limit that? And I don't know enough to say what those things are. But Tony, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to what you said here. And if you want to respond to both these
respond to
things.
Nancy first. If we're going to go back, gosh, 15 years, remember when you, Al Hakem, Bill Toth, Yeoman and I were discussing, the so-called morality of financial markets? You remember this?
Okay.
And one of the comments I think I made is that there's some people, of course, who are very good at making money. What we don't know is how are they dispensing it?
Yeah.
And so they could be giving a lot of it away. We don't know. I mean,
Right.
I need to see the data now. Some people would say, no, that's not possible. But, there are a lot of givers in the world.
Yeah. So there are a lot of, Lonergan likes the phrase further questions.
Yes.
We can't, in order to understand what's going on, you have to keep understanding until there are no further questions. Further significant questions. Yeah, so there's more to be known about that. And so that's why I would hesitate until I knew a lot more to say anything about that. Because I don't like wagging the finger at the bad people. Unless they're so egregiously bad, there's just no question. I just think life is complicated, and the effects of people's choices are sometimes unexpected. And so,
I have a comment. I mean,
okay,
I'd like to respond to him.
okay, I want to. Andrea has had his hand up for a while. He's way in the back, and I'm drinking Italian water.
And I just wanted to share that I was touched by your reminding us of Lonergan's imagining human action into ways he feels good as healing or creating. Right? And imagining more this need that we all have of moving the economic understanding from the strictly financial, money-driven, money-centered, to a larger, more human good-oriented kind of logic that allows the poor to be actually protagonists of a new economy, of a new beginning. There are so many billions of people that have very little economic opportunity. I think that is tremendously important for the church to understand that among the many things that we need to do, to really empower people to be better off, to give people the confidence that they can be a little bit better, that they can do a little bit better. And in many cases, this means becoming an immigrant or doing other things. But I think that there is something very important about holding this idea that economic prosperity is actually coming out of being confident enough to move.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I had a little bit of experience working with a microfinance NGO when I was at Washington, where they gave very small loans, mostly to women, in a variety of countries, underdeveloped countries, and they'd start their own businesses, something they made, or food or whatever, and it was precisely that. The whole point was to let them see that it could be done, that they could themselves produce things that were sufficiently valuable that other people would want to buy them, and that they could pay back their loan, and they can increase the size of their business and so forth. And it had as much to do with the understanding and spirit of the people they were helping about themselves as it did with giving them the money, from what I understood.
Yeah, I think I was there with Gasper Lobiando. Father Lobiando was doing that microfinance. And I'm sorry. And I was struck by one woman who they gave enough. She would put a certain amount of money into one pocket, and then what she earned into another pocket. And on a very simple level, she was able to do her part in creating this small business in Latin America.
Okay.
But I was struck by just the simple,
That's how she did her
Give-
accounting.
yes, given her the way, the means, the pattern
Yeah,
to be part of a business, really.
yeah.
at
Well, and it's,
a local level.
yeah, so an example of microfinance
Yeah.
working. Yeah, so because I don't, these people in this NGO didn't think that it was good for people to just be given and to never produce, that there's something about who we are as human beings. We want to be, in that sense, responsible for our lives, masters of our lives. That we're and adding to the community somehow. We're participants. Yeah. Great.
So Lonergan taught, as you know, the three vectors: progress, decline, and redemption. And we talked a lot about lately, I think, business as an example of progress when it's going well. Many people like to talk about business as an example of decline.
Yeah, sure.
When it's not going well.
Yeah.
Is there a way that businesses participate in the redemptive arc as vector, as Lonergan speaks about it? Or is that always the prerogative of individuals?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I would tend to understand it the latter way, that people are changed and then by grace in such a way that they are ready to forgive, ready to absorb suffering, ready to hope against hope. And that they affect others because of that. They have incarnate meaning that draws others to them, attracts them. And so I would think about it more that way. But I need to think about it more. Honestly, it's a very good question. Yeah. That's it. And I don't want to, I haven't been saying much about decline. Sometimes decline isn't the result of people willfully choosing to do something wrong. But I think about even just all the things going on with supply chain, which, if you want to see an example, if you want to be convinced that there are such things as patterns of cooperation, look what happens when they break down. So what aren't we getting? How come you go into a store, you can't find distilled water. You want distilled water for your iron or your CPAP machine or whatever. Forget it. It's just not there. Well, why is that? And so you can have things start going wrong because unexpected things happen, and the way we had things set up didn't prepare us to deal with them effectively.
But is some of that just natural? Change involves.
Yes.
Is it not? There's
Yes.
decline.
Right. So the
And for
thing.
the better.
Yeah. So the issue is then, do we learn?
Yeah.
So the self-correcting process of understanding, because if we make too many wrong decisions, misunderstand things too badly, we could end up in a real recession or worse potentially, or whatever. And you start getting into political relations, and how do we, if we start affecting our trade with China in certain ways, what's that going to do, and so on. So it's really complex. But I have been accentuating progress today only. Yeah.
It's probably time for
this
one
part
more
of the story.
question.
Okay. Yes.
Well,
Is there?
I have a question for Tony, and I have to respond to him.
Okay.
By
Yes,
asking
please.
questions.
Send you two out for dinner.
Yeah.
He was money manager. Now,
No, go into the other question.
No, I don't see another.
I just wanted to
Great,
respond to
great, great.
Nancy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I didn't see your hand.
What she said really quick, just that, I see, it's just about what you were, and you can start walking, but.
No, that's okay, I just noticed the time.
Yes, just that, the fact that what she's referring to, I would call distortion of our nature, of what is intended in this world that's God's, whatever, doesn't make what you're saying less true. The fact that business operates in that way in certain places, with the idea of putting other businesses out of business and just eating up the world or whatever, some of these very real stuff that's going on in big business. And so the second question is, well, what do we do about that? There's two separate things there. One is
Yes.
what you're saying, the nature of business and what it's for. And this whole other question is,
Yeah.
what do we do about that? And one thing we do is you start giving TED Talks. That's what I'm
Okay.
thinking. Anyhow, I just think that,
TED Talks.
because it's and scripture, one of the main topics in scripture is encourage. And so when we tell the real message, and the real message is good, we encourage new thought, new people who are brought up in this thing maybe people used to know but don't so much know a lot anymore. So it just made me think, when you said that, I'm thinking, yeah, that's two things that we're talking about as far as what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and Lonergan, by the same token, so I've been talking about mostly positive things about business, but again, if you're trying to say, well, what is this thing? What's it built to be? That's like Lonergan trying to say, what does human cognition look like? Do we do it that well all the time? No. But if you know what good thinking looks like, then you have a basis for noticing when it's not good thinking, when you're getting off the track, when people are passing off half-baked ideas for the truth and so forth. So the same thing with this business, having a notion of what it is, should be, what its nature as a cooperative enterprise ought to be. But I thank you also for bringing up the point about encouragement, because that's partly why I give these talks too, to say we can aim higher.
Yes.
And if we aim higher, we won't get all the way, but we'll go farther. The trajectory's set a little differently,
But you also say we're built for it,
and we're built for
which
it. Yeah.
is one of my favorite things that you say.
Okay.
We're built for this.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Wally Kennedy is online.
Oh.
Wally Kennedy is online.
Okay. Great.
Hi, Wally.
Hi, Wally.
Thank you all for coming this evening in person and online, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. God bless.
Thanks, Greg.
Mike.
Yes, you did.